terrorist's primary weapon is fear. Fear is used as a reason to increase military spending and to violate civil liberties. However, terrorism can never be completely eliminated. How can this catch-22 situation be changed?
Well, I think we can take long steps to eliminating terror. One very simple step is to stop participating in it. That would... And I'm not joking. I mean, people now talk about the war on terror as being declared by George W. Bush in 2001. That's totally false. It was declared by Ronald Reagan as soon as he got into office. The core of American foreign policy, he said, was going to be a struggle against state-directed international terrorism. And then comes all the fancy rhetoric, plague of the modern age, you return to barbarism, and so on. And then came 10 years of massive terror by the U.S. That's why it's never talked about. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were killed in Central America, well over 1 million in South Africa, where the United States supported, Reagan particularly, supported the apartheid regime as part of the war on terror. He even had to override congressional sanctions by the late 80s to keep supporting them. And the reason was explicit. The African National Congress is, I'm quoting, one of the more notorious terrorist groups in the world. That's Mandela's African National Congress, as you probably know. Mandela himself only got off the terrorist list a couple years ago. He had to have special dispensation to come to the United States. Middle East, tens of thousands of people killed in the terrorist war. I mean, the worst terrorist atrocities there were literally run by the United States. So, for example, the peak of interest in the media in international terrorism was 1985. That's when media editors picked terrorism in the Middle East as the leading story of the year. And it was fair. The worst terrorist act in the Middle East was in Lebanon, a truck bombing, which killed roughly 80 people, women and girls, when they were leaving a mosque. The truck bombing was set up to go, a big truck bomb to go off when people are leaving the mosque, hundreds injured. But that's not part of doesn't enter the story of terrorism for a very simple reason. It was organized by the CIA. They were trying to kill a cleric, quietist cleric, Sheikh Fadlallah, and they missed. They just killed 80 other people. A big fuss a couple weeks ago about a bombing in Lebanon which killed some people. And it's a terrorist act. Didn't come close to this. The next major terrorist act in that year was the Israeli bombing of Tunis on no pretext, just you can kill them. They killed about 70 people, smart bombs, the whole business. The U.S. participated by not informing its Tunisian ally that the bombers were on their way. U.S. Sixth Fleet pulled back, in fact. They have to fly over the Mediterranean, refuel. Of course, the U.S. knew it, didn't inform them. The third major terrorist act was what Shimon Peres, the great dove, he was prime minister, called the Iron Fist operations in occupied southern Lebanon. It was illegally occupied in violation of Security Council orders. And there was resistance. So Israel carried out major terrorist operations against what they called terrorist villagers in southern Lebanon. That was the third major terrorist act. None of these enter the discussion for the usual reasons. The reason that it was picked in that year was because there were Palestinian terrorist acts in which one American was killed. Okay, that's a different story. So yes, there's an easy, and you can easily extend this, but a major way to stop terrorism is to stop participating in it. And that goes right to the present. Take, say, the global assassination campaign. If anybody else was doing that, we just call it state terrorism, unimaginable state terrorism. And it elicits terrorism in response. So you bomb a village in, Waziristan and kill a couple dozen people. Pretty soon, their cousin or uncle wants to come back and kill you. And this is normal. And we have plenty of evidence, and it's all over. I mean, take, say, one of the cases where terrorism was actually ended, not just reduced, but ended, a serious case, a recent case in Northern Ireland. The IRA was a terrorist organization. They were carrying out pretty serious actions. No joke. Practically killed the whole British cabinet once. I was in Northern Ireland in 1993. Went from Dublin to Belfast. It was a war zone. I met a lot of people. I had contacts. One of the people I met was an IRA hitman who was underground. He had just broken out of a British jail, and he was in some place where he was secure. So I was able to meet him there through some civil rights activists. And we talked for a couple hours. I basically asked him one question. What do you think you're doing by killing Protestants and British? His answer was very simple. They killed my cousin. I'm going to kill their brother. They're going to kill my mother. I'm going to kill their children, and that's how it's going to go. Well, a couple of years later, this guy was on the negotiating team. He's now in the government. What happened is, here the United States played a good role, incidentally. Under U.S. pressure, the British finally got it into their heads that the way to deal with the rising cycle of IRA terror was not by more violence, but by paying some attention to the legitimate grievances. And they were there. And as soon as they started doing that, terrorism declined, the negotiations started. I was in Belfast a year ago, and there's tensions, like ethnic tensions in any city, but it's a peaceful city, not a war zone. That's the way you deal with the minor amount of terror that they do, and dealing with the major amount of terror that you do yourself is by stopping it.
A final word of thanks to Professor Noam Chomsky.